I'm Caitlyn. I'm a public service specialist here at the Dallas Public Library. I work on the Dallas History and Archives floor. And welcome to our Into the Archive series. Today we have author David Fleming here to talk about his book, A Big Mess in Texas, which tells the incredible untold true story of the 1952 Dallas Texans, the most dysfunctional team in the craziest season in NFL history. Uh, Mr. Fleming is the author of 4 books and a Peabody nominated correspondent for Meadowlark Media. During the last 3 decades at ESPN, Sports Illustrated, and Meadowlark, Fleming has been one of the industry's most prolific, versatile, and imaginative long form storytellers. His unique work has earned numerous national awards, as well as a handwritten note from the White House. He's also the author of Who's Your Founding Father, Breaker Boys, the NFL's greatest team, and the stolen 1925 championship, and Noah's Rainbow. Welcome, Mr. Fleming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
All right, so you wanted to sort of talk about my process, or what exactly?
Yes. Oh, yeah. So, hello, everyone. And one of the reasons I was so happy to do this was because I'm indebted to the Dallas Public Library and to Caitlin, our host, especially. Um, the archives and the old newspapers, and those were key to my research while sort of researching and writing the book. And I don't know, Caitlin may be sick of seeing me or hearing from me because I bugged her a lot during the process, but she was so helpful and I'm so grateful. This is actually we've met. It feels like we know each other through emails, but this is the first time we've seen each other face to face, and I'm just so glad to have the opportunity to say thank you to the Dallas Public Library and to Caitlin specifically. If you guys read the book, there a lot of her research is in here. She helped with the amazing photo, the photo insert, and then she also helped with a lot of the research for Chapter 10, which deals with the race issue in Dallas and what the black players on the Texans had to put up with and endure during the 1952 season. And I will tell you specifically one of the things that Caitlin tracked down in the archives, since this is sort of into the archives, was this incredible letter. I was in that chapter, I was trying to express sort of the issues that were going on and what the team, because the team was integrated, what that meant to the Black community in Dallas and the friction that it caused with the rest of Dallas. And what happened was it ended up all the promises that were made to the Black community in 1952 about this team ended up sort of being broken. The team remained integrated and sort of deserves credit and to be honored and remembered for that. If you remember, the Dallas Texans were 15 years ahead of the Texas Longhorns in integrating their roster. But I had all the facts and I had all of the statistics and I had all of the sort of like hard data, but I needed a voice to sort of humanize the way the community felt about being betrayed by the promises that were made by the Dallas Texans. And Caitlin came across, I think it was a 2 or 3 page hand typed letter, an original letter from a Chamber of Commerce member who just wrote he wrote it to the owner, I think, Caitlin. He wrote to Giles Miller, and
Yes.
it was just to express how hurt he was and how excited the community was for the team, and then how hurt he was by the treatment he received. And this is why I'm so indebted to the Dallas Public Library and to Caitlin because it's those little pieces of gold, those little things that you find on this treasure hunt that really bring the book alive. And that letter did it especially. And so I just wanted to sort of bring that up and make that clear from the very beginning, just how indebted I am. So thank you.
Of course, of course. You never know what you're gonna find in an archive, especially when you're not really looking for it. You just sort of come across it. Those things are always pretty fun.
I know. Can you tell me, so how did you stumble across that letter? Was it just in a file or something?
So I'm trying to think. Because you had emailed about going to the Dallas Express, and I couldn't find anything in there really. And then I moved on to another project and was going through the Dallas Negro Chamber of Commerce collection. And in one of the boxes, there was a folder labeled Dallas Texans. And I was like, oh, I've heard of that, but I don't really know what's happening in there. So I take a look, and just sort of the contents of the letter, like you said, just sort of really lined up with what you were looking for, or at least we got a good idea of how the community was feeling about their treatment at the Cotton Bowl,
Right.
which, because the whole point is, they were, Cotton Bowl is segregated. So they were used to that, but then the treatment they experienced at the opening game for the team was especially, I believe, Amacio Johnson, I think is the name of the person who's writing the letter, called it vicious for the most part and said, no, he'd never been treated that way at the Cotton Bowl. And he'd been going to the Cotton Bowl for years at that point. They were going to the Cotton Bowl to watch SMU, the Mustangs, play. So they were used to the segregation, but not quite to the level that they experienced. And I thought that you'd really benefit from seeing it. So I scanned it and emailed it to you months after the fact. And then here we are.
And I don't know if people will appreciate this, but it was very near the end, close to when the manuscript was due. And I ended up pulling apart that chapter to sort of put it back and piece it back together because I did think it was to be able to sort of give voice directly to someone who was there and was an eyewitness. Yeah, that's what makes a difference in my mind between sort of good books and great books are those great little colorful details that you stumble across. And this book, I will just, as more of an introduction, I'll just let people know I worked for ESPN and Sports Illustrated for 30 years. And the stories like the 1952 Dallas Texans are really sort of what had become sort of my niche at ESPN, which is very strange, stranger than fiction, tangentially related to sports, and just things that are so odd and exciting and colorful, you almost think that it's fiction. And when I stumbled across this team and this story, um, and I started to peel back the layers on the characters and the players and what was going on in Dallas. And for somebody like me, those are the kind of moments that you live for. And I still think to this day, even, I think people, even in Texas, don't understand. I mean, Texas is football crazy. And people in Texas and in Dallas still don't know that this team existed, which is crazy to me. That this was the original NFL team. This is the last NFL team to go bankrupt. This team preceded the Cowboys by 8 years. And they are not the Dallas Texans that became the Kansas City Chiefs. This is completely different from that. So I just want to make that clear. Um, I think you can tell by the cover of the book that the team actually, um, the Cowboys basically stole their color palette and their Lone Star logo um, from the Dallas Texans, but have never really kind of connected that or paid homage properly to the original team in Dallas.
Right.
Um, yeah. And I should say too, I will occasionally, let's see, I'm going to put the link to Caitlin. Tell me the name of the bookstore.
In Terabang?
Yes. Yep. Okay. Let's see. I will put the link to if people want to go online and buy it through a local independent bookstore that has been really supportive of the book and of this talk. I will put the link in the chat right now. If I can do two things at once, it'll be a miracle, but we'll see if I can do that. I will also, I think if people have questions, how do you want to handle that, Caitlin? Should we just let people speak up or should they put it in the chat?
We're gonna have people put their questions in the chat, and then around 6:45 we'll open it up, and then I'll read them off to you.
Okay. Oh my God, I think it's our first miracle. I actually think I did it.
Yay! I think it's in
Oh,
there.
there we go. Okay. There we go. Awesome. Okay, great.
Nice.
Um, let's see. So do you want me to just keep talking or which?
Well, I think we should probably give people an idea of who the Texans were. And also, I'm really interested in how you learned about the team.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay, so the 1952 Texans, as we just said, they were the original, the NFL's original attempt to put a franchise in Dallas. They would have in 1952, they were the NFL's first attempt to put a franchise in the South. And then in less than 5 months, this team sort of drank and partied and spent their way out of the NFL in a way that I describe as it's a cross between Animal House and North Dallas 40. And if you are a current Cowboys fan and you're uh-oh, and you're if you are a current Cowboys fan and you think things could never get worse, then I think this book will actually help make you feel better. Because this team, from the get-go, just lost money hand over fist and lost every game except for one Thanksgiving miracle game. And really ended up, in a strange way, though, changing the course of NFL history. One of the reasons why this team isn't very well known is this team then eventually became the squeaky clean NFL saving Johnny Unitas Baltimore Colts. And I think the NFL has actively tried to hope that people forget that that incredible team was born out of this disaster in Dallas. And the team was owned by the Miller family. And Clarence Ransom Miller originally was known in the 1950s um, as the textile king of the South. And his son, the book opens with him arguing with his son who wants to invest the family fortune into the NFL. And it's hard to understand in context right now because the NFL and the Cowboys, especially, right, are so huge and they're worth so much money and it's such a corporation and so buttoned down. But the thing I love about this book and about this team is the NFL in the 1950s was barely hanging on by a thread. And 31 of the first 43 franchises in the NFL went bankrupt. And I know it is. I know it's hard to understand that because until the television money kicked in, um, ticket sales was the only revenue stream. So this team was dependent on people showing up to the Cotton Bowl. And what happened was they just didn't, people just at the time, just they weren't ready for an integrated roster. And they especially didn't like people who weren't from Texas representing Texas. And they liked high school football, they liked college football, and they thought that playing pro football was undignified. And so the book opens with Clarence Miller arguing with his son about what a terrible investment the NFL is. And Clarence ended up being very smart because this team ended up bankrupting Giles Miller and his father and the entire the textile sort of the huge textile industry that he had built up. Um, so and the connection to today's Dallas. So Giles Miller, the team's owner, his grandson is Rhett Miller, who is the lead singer and songwriter for the iconic band, the old 97s. And the research for this book actually started backstage at one of Rhett Miller's shows near where I live. I had learned about the team. I was interested in doing a book. I just needed to know more. And so, and it was weird. I think all books require a little bit of magic, a little bit of luck. And certainly I have that with Caitlyn and all of her help. I was so lucky to have that. But right when I found out about the story and I went to the old 97 show, I hadn't like reached out to their PR person or anything. I just went to the show. I went really early, so it was right before their sound check, and I ended up talking my way backstage. And then Rhett and I talked about the team and his grandpa and his family fortune and Dallas, and we ended up talking for like 2 hours before their show. And that's when then Rhett then really helped connect me with research and family members and old documents and all of that stuff, which includes, since we're doing archives, um, this is his grandfather. This is one of, I think, only three copies of Rhett's grandfather, Giles Miller, the guy who owned the 1952 Dallas Texans. He wrote and self-published his own sort of like diary slash memoir. And you could see it is really, it's homemade. Um, but when I got this in the mail from Rhett, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like it's similar to the letter that we were talking about, Caitlin. This is like having someone's first person account 75 years after the fact. And it was when I got this, I was like, oh my gosh, we're off and running. So again, and yes,
So we also have a copy at the library.
oh wow. Okay, yours looks like it's in better shape than mine.
Yeah, they used to bind books here at the library, so this one has a different cover. But and I found this like way after I was doing my exhibit, and I was like, "Oh, this is
Wow.
really cool." So if
Okay,
you want to see it, it's also here at the library. You can't check it out, but the title of the book is for Peter in the chat, "The Dallas Texans Saga," or at the time the New York Yanks became the Baltimore Colts.
and if you're wondering about Giles Miller's skills as a writer, that headline, the title of the book, should tell you everything. It's it's a little bit confusing and all over the place, but it was invaluable. And I have to tell you, Keaton, that's like the first one in color I've seen. I think you guys might have like the only. This looks like a copy. Yours looks like an original. Like that's really cool.
Yeah, I just don't know. All it says is a gift from Miss Edith Risley. So thank you to her.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. Because um, people who are in their family were like, whoa, where did you find that? And then all along, there's always been a copy at the
Yeah.
library. So go figure. Um, I'll tell you another thing too that was really cool. I'm going to show you. So the team at the time in the 50s, it was the team was really because it was the first team in the South, it got a lot of coverage. They went bankrupt and they were so bad, it went away, the memories went away. But at the time, so this is a 1952 edition of Collier's. Um, and then look at this spread. This is the spread on the Dallas Texans. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Um, so finding stuff like that also was this is Sport Magazine from 1952, and this is another huge spread of the team. That's Buddy Young, their starting running back. That was very, very popular at the time. Everybody loved him. Um, but I think I also wanted to point out, I think the we talked about the television money and how that changed everything, most of it for the better with the NFL. But the 1950s, before the television money kicked in, it what really was this sort of like Wild West version of the NFL, and it was kind of like anything goes. There were almost no rules. There were no face masks. There was a lot of partying going on. There was a lot of carousing going on. The players one of my favorite things that I found was they were trying to build up their passing game, the Texans were. And so they were trying to convince a guy who had been an All-American wide receiver at North Carolina. and they were trying to get him to come play for their team. But he had a good job as a science teacher in high school
Oh,
in North Carolina. And he was like, no, thank you. I'm making more money as a science teacher than I would as a wide receiver, an NFL wide receiver. So that'll tell you sort of how different things were back in 1952 in the NFL.
yeah, that's crazy to think about considering now they're making like millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So, I mean, I guess my big question is why exactly did they fail? When I was doing my own little research for this and my exhibit, it seemed like they were sort of doomed from the start. They came from a team or they were brought to Texas because the other guy had failed when they were in New York, I believe. So it just seemed like they didn't come from a culture of winning, you would say. So what happened? Why couldn't they make it work here?
Yeah, it's weird. They had that team, they came from we just I was just showing you some different magazines and research, but when Giles Miller bought this team and he bought it for if you add on all the things he had to pay for and all the back rent he had to pay for and all that stuff, it was probably more than $1 million. And the Saturday Evening Post called him for making that, for paying the most money ever for the worst team ever. They said Giles Miller is officially the biggest chump in America. So he and you're absolutely right. They were terrible the year before. They had an incredible draft and they ended up, this is the crazy thing. This team, more than a dozen members of the 1952 Dallas Texans, went on to be Hall of Famers in either the College Football Hall of Fame or the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Um, for example, both Art Donovan and Gino Marchetti, the famous Hall of Fame defensive line duo for the Baltimore Colts, they got their start with the Dallas Texans. Again, you can't make this stuff up, but I think the roster just hadn't come together. All that talent hadn't really developed yet. And their coach had the joke was that their coach had retired before the season, but didn't tell anybody. So they didn't, he didn't really believe in practice. They didn't really do a lot of practicing. Um, and and I think locally, the town, they didn't like that they were, I think they started 0 and 9. And people like a winner. And people just were like, on top of everything else that was against the Texans, they were like, we don't like that it's not high school. We don't like that it's not college. We don't like that it's on Sunday. We think that that is supposed to be the Lord's Day. We don't like that they're getting paid so much. Um, we don't like that it's all these people who aren't from Texas. And then on top of that, we're not going to support a winning team. Um, but the bottom line is, and we address this in the book, and this is the part of the Texan story that has been nostalgically whitewashed since 1952. And um, I hope is brought back to the forefront by the book or by discussions like this. But at the end of the day, um, the Dallas Texans had an integrated roster, and their two best players were Buddy Young and George Talfaro. And Dallas at the time in 1952, I mean, think about that. It's 15 years before the Texas Longhorns integrate their roster. So what Buddy Young and George Talfaro had to endure. They couldn't live with the rest of their teammates. They had to live in a different part of Dallas. And at the end of the day, there's no question that Dallas just would not support an integrated roster, and that is why the team, no one came to watch the team, and they went bankrupt so quickly. If you look at people might not even have ever seen the Cotton Bowl this empty. But if you look at photos, a lot of them that Caitlyn actually found in the archives, it looks like they're playing on the moon. If you can see, like there is no one in the Cotton Bowl. Um, and So through all those factors, they needed crowds of 25 to 30,000 to break even. And the thinking was high school teams in Dallas in 1952 were drawing 40,000 people to the Cotton Bowl. And so the owner thought, I think smartly, that if high schools can get 40,000, surely we can get 30. But yeah, no, just nobody showed up. And they also were expecting, they were sort of, uh, the black community had pledged to bring as many as 15,000 fans to those games. And because they were so, they were so uplifted by the representation on the team and the fact that this team with a Dallas name was going to have their two best players were black. And in that sort of like in that hopeful moment, the owner, Giles Miller, said, well, we will, the Cotton Bowl was segregated in 1952, and Giles Miller proposed that they would try to desegregate the Cotton Bowl so that the black community wouldn't just have to stay in one specific area. And they made all these promises. Everybody was super excited, and they go to the very first game, and not only is has nothing changed, there was actually a backlash, and the black community was actually even more segregated and forced to stand in the end zone in the sun, even though the rest of the stadium was empty. And um, once the black community then abandoned the Texans for all those broken promises, I think it was only a matter of weeks before they ran out of money.
So let's see. So what were you surprised to learn about in researching this team? Were there any surprises? Were you sort of expecting to see these things?
I was, as somebody who lives for this kind of stuff, I was super surprised by all the off the field shenanigans. I kind of think of, I'm dating myself, but it's like, oh, 1950s, right? Post-war, the American economic boom. It's happy days, right? And man, these players, uh, boy, they partied a lot. They were they were drinking like crazy. They partied nonstop. Some of the guys would drink at halftime. Some of them would have a smoke and a drink at halftime, um, and they Buddy Young and George Taliaferro lived in South Dallas, but the rest of the team lived in this like garden apartment in downtown Dallas that became like a fraternity house. Um, and it was nearby where the American Airlines had their stewardess training center. And so apparently, yeah, it was just like a nonstop coming and going and partying. And I think the players became so frustrated with the way they were treated in Dallas and then treated by the NFL that they went on a bender that, and I say this in the book, that would make the Jimmy Johnson Dallas Cowboys blush.
Wow. I was as you were talking, I was like, this sounds kind of familiar, like a familiar story, the Cowboys of the 90s, maybe. Um, Something a coworker was interested in is that the name the Dallas Texans comes up quite often in Dallas history. Did you have any problems differentiating between teams essentially? Like, because I know there was the AFL team, which is now the Chiefs. Then you also have like an amateur hockey team that was the Dallas Texans. There's like a roller skating hockey team as well. All these little, it's a popular name, but for some reason it's never really quite stuck, it seems.
Yeah, so the team was originally supposed to be the Dallas Rangers.
Oh.
Um, and then for whatever reason, the NFL commissioner at the time, Bert Bell, didn't like that. And this is how much control the NFL had at the time. He called up Giles Miller and said, "You aren't the Rangers, you're the Texans." And the very next day, the team was the Texans. But you're right, Caitlin. I've done a lot of media in Dallas and around Texas, and everybody asks the same question. They're like, it's an arena league team, it's a hockey team. It's everybody thinks that this team is the team that became the Kansas City Chiefs. And in fact, um, there was a one of the promotional things online for this talk had a picture of the Kansas City Chiefs Texans and not the actual Dallas Texans. So
No.
it's like we all make those. I make those. I still make those mistakes to this day. So yeah, I get what I get a lot, and it's crazy. Is all even diehard researched up to date football, sports, and history fans kind of go, what team? I've never heard of that team before. And I
Mm.
just, it's good because I know we're going to be teaching them something new, but it's also a little like, that's so weird that the original Dallas Texans people have forgotten completely.
Yeah, they just sort of faded in out of existence almost, it seems. Also, probably considering no current team really claims the Dallas Texans. There's no through line for them. Because we know that once the team, essentially the NFL takes the team back, right?
Yep.
And then they are a traveling team, and that's where they get their one win.
Right. Right.
Um, and then they become the Baltimore Colts, I want to say, and then from there you get the Indianapolis Colts and that sort of thing. But there is no like they don't claim the Dallas Texans, I guess,
They
or do
don't,
they?
but they don't, but they should. I always think, I mean, I feel like the Dallas Cowboys they should wear Dallas Texans throwback uniforms. I mean, how cool would that be? Um, it's hard to see, but the the original Dallas Texans, one of the coolest things they had like it was like the outline of the state in blue, it was like in blue on their sleeves. And then they had like a Spartan stripe. They had blue helmets and then a Spartan stripe of white down the middle. So it would be super cool to see the Cowboys in those uniforms. And when they moved to Baltimore to save money, they used a lot of the old equipment from the Texans. And so if you look at old photos of the Baltimore Colts, you can see the outline of Texas on like the back of their parkas and on some of their sweatshirts. So they weren't completely erased. And then I don't understand why like the Indianapolis Colts are having a great season. They should acknowledge the fact that they started as this crazy team in 1952.
Yeah, for sure. What other things? So we've talked about a couple of I guess who are the major players for in this group of characters?
So it's going to be hard to narrow it down because, and the other thing I love about this team is this team ends up becoming like the Forrest Gump of the NFL. It feels like they're connected to everything. They're connected to the current day Colts and they're connected to the Cowboys and they're connected to the Baltimore Colts. But you have Giles Miller, who's connected to Rhett Miller and the old 97s. The head coach was a well-known quarterback. Jimmy Phelan was the name of the coach, but he was a well-known, he's connected to Notre Dame. He was a famous quarterback at Notre Dame. Frank Tripucka, who ended up quarterbacking the Texans late in the season, he is in the Denver Broncos Ring of Honor. You've got Art Donovan as an NFL Hall of Famer, Gino Marchetti, who is arguably the greatest defensive player in the history of the NFL. You can ask your dad, he'll tell you. He was a rookie on the Dallas Texans. I mean, it's like you can't make this up. Um, let's see, you've got so we've talked about the coach, you've talked about the different players, and then you've got the guy who, um, let's see, the team's also connected to this team moving to Dallas opened up a spot on the LA Rams front office for a marketing guy named Pete Rozelle, who ends up becoming NFL commissioner. So it just goes on and on and on like that. It's like everybody seems to be connected through 5 degrees of the Texans.
Mhm. So I don't think I've mentioned this, but the team we've mentioned this, but the team went 1-11. So they lost every game but one. Do you want to sort of talk about the game that they won or
I do, yes. Because it's the Cowboys always play on Thanksgiving. And so they go bankrupt. Giles Miller has to give the team he has to sort of like return the team to the NFL. And he does so. And as the team is sort of like taxiing um, on their charter flight away, the players look out the window and Giles Miller is crying. Um, Probably because he was this close from owning like a team that would one day become worth billions of dollars. But the team is given back to the NFL. For whatever reason, they move the Dallas Texans to Hershey, Pennsylvania for the rest of the season. Um, I think it's because it was relatively close to Philadelphia, where that was where the NFL offices were in 1952. So the team plays the rest of their games as a road team, but still the Dallas Texans based in Hershey. And again, if you go to Hershey to this day, they will still tell you stories about the Dallas Texans partying in Hershey in 1952. Apparently, there was one really good bar in Hershey, and the Texans drank them dry in like 10 days. So again, not a lot of practice, not a lot of football stuff, but they they're supposed to play the Bears on Thanksgiving in Dallas. Instead, the NFL decides we can't bring them back to Dallas, so we're going to have them play the Chicago Bears in Akron, Ohio. And it's even more humiliating because they made the Texans play as a second part of a doubleheader and the first game was a high school game. So 30,000 people pack into this high school stadium on Thanksgiving to watch the two rival high schools play. And then when that game ends and the Texans and the Bears are warming up, 29,500 of those fans leave. and and the Texans have to play the Bears in this freezing cold temperature in front of almost no fans. And there's this amazing moment where it's almost like got straight out of a movie where the Texans say enough. Like enough is enough. We're mad at Dallas for abandoning us. We're mad at the NFL. We're mad at the Bears. We're mad at everybody. And it's almost like a sports movie. They just out of nowhere, everything comes together. They click and they end up beating the Chicago Bears in what the Chicago Tribune called the greatest upset in NFL history on Thanksgiving. And George Halas, the Bears' legendary coach, is so mad. Afterwards, they served all the players turkey dinners because they were missing Thanksgiving. Well, George Halas is so mad and so embarrassed that they've lost to this team from Texas. He goes up and down the row of his players and he slaps the turkey dinners out of their laps and he says, you guys don't deserve Thanksgiving for losing to this team.
wow. What a way to what a way to go out, I guess, to become the last team to go belly up in the NFL, as one would say. So we're nearing 6:45, so I'm going to open this up to questions from the chat. If you have anything you want to know, type it in the chat and I'll read them out. We do have a couple of questions already, so I'll just read the first one. Linda would like to know, how did they get their players? There wasn't a college draft, was there?
Okay, let's see. I'm going to paste the link one more time. Look at this. Okay. So there was a college draft. And this is another crazy part of the story. The Texans draft in 1952 is considered to be one of the greatest drafts in the history of the NFL. They drafted a guy in the first round who ended up becoming a Hall of Famer for the Los Angeles Rams. They drafted Gino Marchetti in the second round. He is, as we talked about, he is considered one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the NFL. Then they drafted this will give you an idea of how crazy the draft was back then. In the 26th round, of the 1952 draft, they drafted George Young, who went on to become a Hall of Fame GM for the New York Giants. Um, so they did. The team was already pretty good, and then they had this incredible draft. And I think that's part of the reason why Giles Miller invested the money that he did, is he saw the Baltimore Colts. The Texans eventually become this incredible team in Baltimore. And I think Giles Miller saw that he was just a couple years ahead of his time. I'll tell you a quick story about George Young. He was at the Texans training camp and he got cut because he wore really thick glasses and he was essentially blind without his glasses, but he couldn't wear his glasses because there were no face masks back then. So he plays without his glasses. And one day during practice, he jumps on what he thinks is a fumble and picks it up and runs it all the way down the field for a touchdown. And it was when he was in the end zone, they realized he had picked up somebody's helmet. And it was just that he was so blind, he couldn't tell the difference between a helmet and a football. And he got cut that very same day.
Wow. Just also as my own aside, George Taliaferro, who's also on this team, was, I believe, the first African American to be drafted in the NFL. Am I correct on
Yes.
that?
Yes. And
Prior, I'm sorry.
yes. No, no, I was thanking you for reminding me of George Talfera, who he was the Texans' lone Pro Bowl player, and yeah, he is considered by many people to be the Jackie Robinson of the NFL. He was the first black player to be drafted in the NFL. He is, by all accounts, things were the way that they ran quarterback and direct snaps back then. It makes it a little bit confusing. But George Taliaferro was also considered by many to be the first black quarterback, first modern day black quarterback.
Oh,
Um, and he played for Indiana and led Indiana to their first and only undisputed Big Ten championship while literally single-handedly integrating the town of Bloomington. So,
wow.
I mean, these guys are legendary on and off the field. They are very worth learning about. It's just an incredible collection.
All right. Another question from Linda. She wants to know, why were they integrated? Were other NFL teams integrated?
Yes, so starting in 1940, the late 1940s, the NFL did sort of lift their unofficial ban on black players, and starting with like Marion Motley with the Cleveland Browns, their teams did integrate, and so the Texans were the season before they were based in New York. And Buddy Young and George Telfairo were on their roster. And so as soon as the Giles Miller bought the Yanks, that was the first thing all the newspapers, everybody wanted to know is, what are you going to do? I mean, the Jim Crow laws at the time basically outlawed everything that the Texans were going to do, right? Eat together, practice together, shower together, live together. Um, and it was a real issue. And I want to give Giles Miller credit for going against basically all of his friends and colleagues and all of the sort of culture of Dallas at the time. Giles Miller, as we said, his father was a multi millionaire at the time, and so Giles Miller, like a lot of rich white people back then, was essentially raised by his family's black butler. This man, his name was Earl Goins, and he essentially was, and Giles refers to him as a father figure, and and you see why these things matter, because then Giles gets older, he buys the team, and he says, I am keeping, we are going to put the best players on the field regardless of race. And somebody asked him why, because he was going against, he was going against white society at the time. And he said, essentially, I have to be able to look Earl in the eyes. And if I get rid of these black players, I won't be able to look Earl in the eyes. And so, to his credit, he kept those players and he supported them and he never wavered, even though it basically cost him everything.
Sure. Okay. Michelle wants to know how many other NFL teams were there in 1952?
Great question. You're gonna have to. I don't know 100% without looking, but I'm going to say 12. I could be wrong, but one of the reasons why Dallas got a team was when the New York team went bankrupt, they needed a 12th team for scheduling balance. And so one of the reasons, even though there was the issue with the integrated roster, no team had ever been in the South. They weren't sure about Texas, if it was viable as an NFL franchise, but they went ahead and rolled the dice because they were so desperate for that 12th team to keep things even.
Oh, right. That looks like that's all the questions there were in the chat. I do want to also just point out that other teams that we're playing that you might recognize are like the Chicago Bears, which you've mentioned, the New York Giants, were also a team back then. Detroit Lions,
Yes. Yep.
and then the Rams. These are like all the photos that we have in our collection that I'm like trying to think of real quick. But so there are quite a few teams that are currently around that did in fact survive the 50s and the era before we really were seeing games almost on television almost every single night.
Yeah. No, I think people would recognize almost every team. I think the Eagles, the Steelers, the Bears, the Cardinals were in Chicago in 1952 before they moved to St. Louis and then Arizona. And then you had the 49ers in San Francisco, the Rams in Los Angeles. Um, and I'm trying to think. And you had the Lions. The Lions are the ones who won they won the championship that season. Um, and let's see. Yeah, and then it would take 8 years until this is an interesting tidbit. So Giles Miller goes bankrupt and he's on the verge of having to turn the team back over. And in a desperate attempt, he reaches out to I'm going to look up his name because I don't want to forget it. He reaches out to Clint Murchison. People can nod if I'm pronouncing that right, to try and bail him out to keep the team in Dallas. Well, Clint Murchison is the one who then 8 years later ends up bringing the Cowboys to Dallas. He was the original owner of the Dallas Cowboys. And that's one of the very few direct connections between the Texans and the eventual America's team.
Right. Brandon asks, was there radio broadcasting of NFL then?
Yes, yes. And in fact, there was a guy, he was the president of like, I think it was called Liberty Broadcasting, and it's all explained in the book. And he was originally the one who thought up the idea of bringing an NFL team to Dallas. And it was partly because he wanted to increase his roster of things to broadcast. Um, he ended up in a lawsuit with Major League Baseball, and the NFL didn't like the fact that he was mixed up with all these lawsuits. And so they said, you can't be involved. Who else do you have? And that's when Giles Miller stepped forward. But I think it's hard for people in context to understand before 1958. So the Dallas Texans go bankrupt. They move to Baltimore. They become the Johnny Unitas Baltimore Colts. And in 1958, the Baltimore Colts beat the New York Giants in what's known as the greatest game ever played. And they win in sudden death overtime. And Gino Marchetti makes a game-saving tackle late in the game that he becomes very famous for. But 50 million people end up watching that game on television. And the NFL commissioner at the time is crying after the game. And people, the guy was like a bulldog of a human being, very rough, very loud. And they were like, "Why are you crying?" And he was like, he knew that the NFL had finally made it, that they were going to have this TV revenue stream that would save the NFL from almost constant threat of bankruptcy up until that point. And that's when the whole NFL changes with the broadcasting money. It's fascinating. And I'll just say quickly, that's another really interesting part is just America in the 1950s and how the NFL fit into that. I will tell you one, the players had all come back from the war, and none of them really thought they were going to survive the war. And so they get back to America and they're heroes, but they're never they having very nearly died, they come back and they're never going to take themselves too seriously or the NFL too seriously. You know, they're like, after what we've been through, the NFL this is a piece of cake. And it
Right.
infuses the league with this like anything goes, self-deprecating, humorous, chaotic, colorful attitude that people just were drawn to. And then the other aspect is so the NFL starts to take off in popularity and entertainment value. The other thing is at the start of the 1950s, less than 10% of American households had televisions. And by the end of the 1950s, that number was above 90%. And the thing that helped fill the void, with everybody now has a television and now they need something to watch, the thing that really helped fill that void, that vacuum, was the NFL. And that all those things come together, and now that is the beginning of what the NFL is today. And sadly, and again, I think it drove him half crazy. Giles Miller and the 52 Dallas Texans were that close. If they had been able to hang on for like 2 more years, yeah, they would be household names right now.
Yeah. And Walt in the chat says Cleveland Browns. I think this is referring back to our little naming of teams that were around back then. I believe they were. Uh, so
Oh,
we're near, so we're nearing our time. Um, and I think that was a really great way to end the talk, honestly. Just sort of, how far the league has come since 1952. So thank you very much. This was really fun, and we could honestly have kept going. I feel like there's so much to talk about in regards to this team.
yeah, yeah. As you can tell, I feel like I've been immersed in this story for years, and I have. And I still get fired up talking about it because I think it's so much fun to tell people who maybe think they know everything about Dallas or everything about Texas or everything about the NFL that there's this whole team that existed that nobody knows about.
Right.
And again, I want to thank the Dallas Public Library and Caitlin, you especially. I wanted to thank you again. And I will put the link in to it's in Terra Bang Books. Um, let's see if I can figure this out one last time. Oh,
Yeah.
there we
Here we go.
go. Yeah, so I'm glad to be here and grateful for all of the help along the way.
Thank you so much. Also, Linda says she thinks Murkison is pronounced like with a CK, so Murkison.
Oh, see, now thank you. I'm learning. Now I'm learning.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. And we will be sending out the recording of this in email. So if you missed the beginning, don't worry, you'll get to see it again. And it'll be on our YouTube channel. So
That's awesome. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can contact me at it's Flem, Flem, file, File at gmail.com. If I pronounce anything else wrong or if I got the number of teams wrong, you can admonish me there online. But I'm happy to answer any other questions too if people have it.
awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much once again. And hopefully we'll meet again sometime.
For sure, for sure. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye.